So welcome everybody to Chazin-the-Dream. I'm your host, Ethan, and I'm really excited today to have Kimberly Benoit join us. She's a world-class leadership coach. She's a best-selling author. I wanted to invite her on the program today to talk a little bit about her background and experience, what led her to leadership coaching, but also to share, if I might, Kimberly, your book. So I
Yes.
wanted to start out doing that. Yep. So I want to share where everybody can go to get, we've all done it.
Yep.
Getting real about the role that we each play in a toxic workplace. I don't know about anybody listening today, but you probably, if you're like most American workers, worked in some kind of toxic environment or culture. So Kimberly's book, we've all done it. Have you ever had a toxic leader? I bet you chuckled and nodded just reading the question, right? We all have. I spent 20 years in corporate in this situation, which is why I went out on my own. Now, for the next question that Kimberly poses, how many of your current and your former employees see your face when they're asked the same question? So,
Hmm.
Kimberly, I thought that was as great a place to start as any. So, $1 million question. What led you to write We've All Done It?
So I actually talk about this in the book, is that I was having dinner with a close friend coworker, and we were having a very animated discussion about leaders that we worked with or for, and how like they could be nice people, but they were crap leaders. Like there was no accountability, they were pushovers, some of them were bullies, and we were just having lovely dinner, couple glasses of wine. And after we had talked about it for a second, it was almost a lightning bolt moment when I said, "Oh my God, I wonder how many people see my face and are having like this kind of conversation about me."
Hmm.
And the sad reality was, I immediately could see it. I knew at least like one or two people who would see my face instantly. Right. And so that's pretty much where it started. Now, I'm not going to, it was an interesting concept because when you think about toxic leaders, we can think about other people very quickly.
For sure.
And we can think about the way we've been wronged or how we've been mistreated. Um, Rarely do we ever stop and reflect on, have we been that person for someone else? That doesn't mean we were malicious when we did it. It could have just been an experience or just circumstance. Um, but for that person, we were like a walking version of Satan. And so that's kind of where this became, is like, how often do we need to stop and maybe reflect on how we are showing up, meaning you and me,
Mhm.
for the people that we serve. And that's kind of where it starts, are the basic, simple things you and I do every single day. Um, and how sometimes good leaders make bad choices or can make mistakes.
But, 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 amen, sister. And it's nice to know that wine facilitated that epiphany, that aha moment. But I mean, I feel like the question that should be asked right now with that seminal moment you had, which led you to write, we've all done it, is we all have blind spots. And
Yeah.
so we see less than amazing attributes, toxic attributes in others.
Yeah.
But it feels to me like a very rare experience. And reading your book, I think you kind of touched on some of this. It's rare to see people acknowledge those toxic traits in themselves. Doesn't that require a sense of maturity, or dare I say emotional intelligence, to turn the looking glass in? And
Oh,
how do
yeah.
you get there? I mean, saying we should is a lot different than people going, you
Yeah.
know what, Kimberly, you're right.
So I think it's baby steps, right? I don't think you just become emotionally intelligent overnight. I don't think self-awareness is something that's easy for most people. I think it starts with saying, after you've had an interaction with someone, it could be a leader, it could be somebody you work with, somebody who works for you, and say, you know, it didn't go well. Like, it doesn't take a genius to know when some conversation or some situation did not go well.
I could
It's,
even tell you that we could take your model and
yeah,
apply it to any relationship, professional or
yeah.
outside of work. Okay, okay.
And so yeah, because this is ironically can apply to anything. And
Yeah,
just ask yourself, if I could go back and do this again, if I could start over, what's
yeah.
one thing I would do differently? One thing. I'm not saying all of it, but what is one thing I could do, one thing I could say that I wish I could have a mulligan? I wish I could have a do-over. That's where you start, because that's the moment you start to break down what just happened and think, man, if I could do that one thing differently, say that one comment or not say that one comment, could that have changed the direction it went?
Yeah.
And that's how it starts, is asking that very basic question. If I could have a do-over, what would you change? Because if you ask that question of anybody, no one would ever say, well, I was perfect. I've never had that happen. I've always had people say, well, I could probably do this differently. And that's where you start the process. It's, again, this isn't like this isn't rocket science or brain surgery. It's the incremental challenging of yourself
But
in that way.
yeah, yeah, I love this idea of the baby step or the mulligan is being able to say this, that conversation I just had, I can just viscerally feel it didn't go well.
Yeah.
Let me replay that in a moment of quiet reflection and see how I may have adversely or unintentionally contributed to it. Is there something in the baby step framework process you talk about where after I have that reflection and that aha moment, not necessarily what do I do next time, but maybe what is your advice for somebody who's a manager or a leader and goes back to the other individual to maybe revisit the conversation with a fresh perspective, knowing that they may have contributed to it?
So, yeah, so here's a couple things I would offer. And particularly if we're looking at a leader who is a new leader and doesn't have a lot of experience, or I would say somebody who is really uncomfortable with conflict. If you fall into either or both of those categories, what I encourage you to do is find a peer or a mentor or somebody and go practice what you're about to say.
Mm.
It's no different. Like, get becoming a better leader is no different than any other skill you have to learn. It does take practice. And so what I encourage people to say is, one, if you have made a mistake, own it. Because again, you're modeling the behavior you want your team to have, right? So everything you do is a modeling and a reinforcement, which again goes and feeds into culture of the environment you're trying to create. So if you screwed up in some way, or you've done something that you wish you could do differently, you can go back and say, hey, I'd like to talk about this.
Yeah. I
Like,
love that idea though of having a sounding board if you're
yeah,
new to it and or you're uncomfortable with it. I mean, I fall into the trap of being incredibly conflict avoidant because I'm not comfortable with it. But
yeah.
if I had had earlier in my career somebody to soundboard it or role play, it would have helped. I see that. But it sounds to me like you're saying that the takeaway I'm taking of it, you just said you have to see your contribution. I hear accountability and
Yeah.
I hear therefore connecting your dots, maybe not correctly. Leadership has as a strong aspect of it being accountable for your contribution to the toxic place. I mean, is that
Yeah.
fair? And are there other attributes that people should be on the lookout when they're becoming more self-aware?
Yeah. So the thing I would tell anybody is it takes two, like the whole thing, it takes two to tango,
Mm,
right?
mhm.
And so, but rarely we all either want to be the whole hero or the whole victim, right? Like when people tell stories at the end of the day, when you go home and you are talking to your friend, your partner, your spouse, or whatever about the crap day you had, you are rarely are you talking about your contribution to it. But guess what? You're
Right.
in there. And I like to, the way I usually tell people is I feel like we play three different roles potentially. And we can play multiple roles in any interaction, any relationship we have. One is we are the instigator, like we are bringing it to the table. Like And we've all had it. Like, I'm having a bad day. I walk into a room and the
Boom,
people who are in front of me they did nothing wrong to me, but
boom.
boy, are you going to catch it today.
Just because you're an outlet for,
Because the kettle has the pot has boiled over and stuff is flying everywhere, right? So you can be the instigator. Then you have the person who's on the receiving end, right? um Maybe for better or for worse, you're just stuck having to deal with it. And then the third role that I talk about is people who are the observers. You're watching it
ooh,
happen. So believe it or not, you also have power in this situation. So what I like to tell everyone is you all have choices. So even if like somebody's bringing it to you, how you choose to respond to it either will help or hurt the situation.
can
You're
we
either going
dive
to,
right? Yeah, can we dive right into that? Because
yeah.
it really resonates with me. I mean, I love, first of all, I didn't get to this part when I was yet discovering the book. I didn't get to the three roles, but throughout my career, as I said earlier, I was a recipient of so much toxic behavior and toxic culture that I literally, viscerally couldn't stomach the thought of going to work in another company, went out on my own. And as the receiver of this toxicity, what's your advice or what are your baby steps, like top few recommendations for finding your voice when you feel like this is being done unto you?
So a couple things. So first and foremost, I always tell people to check yourself, because when it's a very emotional situation, we will respond emotionally.
As
And
the
that's
victim,
all.
as the
And
victim.
as the victim,
Okay.
and sometimes that can fuel the storm even higher, right? So that gives a person to justify why they're behaving the way they behave. Well, look at what she did. She started screaming at me. She started crying. She started, there's a list of things. Now, granted, these are all natural responses, but the thing I try to encourage people to always remember is that even though it feels personal, it's not. And you have to be the advocate for yourself. So you
Who
have
would
to,
do that? Like, what's your advice to this new group of people called Gen Zs or maybe younger
yeah.
millennials who are just getting their own bearing, their own feet established in their careers? How do you do that? Because I would imagine that's not easy for many individuals.
Oh, again, this is not like super easy stuff. A lot of it comes from practice. So when you find yourself in a situation, and granted, especially if there's a power difference,
Yeah.
right? So
Uh-huh.
it's your leader who's screaming at you. You may not be able to do much in that moment, other than maybe like sit there, let it happen, right? So because people will do one of two things: they're going to fight or flight.
Right. Right.
And so in that moment, your safer choice may be just to not say anything.
Right.
Some people, they use it as an excuse to, well, they're behaving badly, so it gives me justification to behave badly too.
Right.
And
Right.
so it's in those moments of you have to figure out what is your ultimate goal. You want to get out of this unscathed as much as possible. You want to protect yourself as much as possible. So I always encourage people in the moments when you feel yourself wanting to scream back, wanting to make a snarky remark back.
Yeah.
And I say this from experience, don't. Because again, there's a power dynamic here. You are not the power player in this situation. And
That's
although
it.
it feels good in the moment, it's not going to serve you long term. So
Oh,
my what I would advise people to do is don't get in the storm.
right.
Don't get in the eye of the hurricane with them. You don't need to do that. But sit back, observe, learn, listen. And then once you get out of that dynamic, either there's opportunities to go talk to HR. This is why I advocate very heavily for mentorship. Go talk to someone who is more experienced than you, that understands the dynamic that's going on in your workplace, so that you can get really specific guidance, particularly for your organization and the culture you're in as well.
And I do want to stop here because I think that I have to ask the question.
Go for it.
You framed it so eloquently. The notion of, don't get in the storm with them, but observe and learn and listen, and then go your own way, decompress,
Yeah.
um, think about and maybe document what happened and what you would like to respond. But I have a gentle pushback on you.
Go
In
for it.
terms of the piece about the finding an advocate,
Yeah,
I will disagree with you pathologically that HR is not a friend of employees. HR, for the most times in organizations, doesn't exist to serve employees. They're fighting to get a seat at the management table. So in their
correct.
relationship in the organization, they're not an advocate in most organizations, I'm saying subjectively. So absent of having that impartial, objective champion, you talk about the toxic people and culture. How would I, as a young professional or anybody, try to find an organization that creates a safer workplace culture, creates advocates and champions, reduces toxicity and embraces positive culture, conflict? How do you find that? Because I will guarantee you that in most organizations, if I want to run to HR, they're not going to resolve that on my behalf. They're going to somehow make me accountable and or maybe document it as a strike against me.
So here's what I would say, and because I want to address that, because I think that's incredibly important. I agree with you. What I'm saying is if you find yourself in a situation where there has been something done to you that is actually a policy violation or something that is egregious
Okay.
beyond like somebody just having a bad day,
Right.
right?
Right.
Where you really have the whole reason employee relations exists. What you're going to want to do, to your credit, is go back, document. I would say talk to somebody to, again, make sure you're not just swallowing, believing your own story, because we all have
And
our own versions.
right.
But to your point, HR is, I have a lot of friends in HR, and I think
I'm
that what I would
sorry.
say about it is, so they are some of the hardest working people. And I think the challenge for them is they see the worst of every organization every single day. And I think that grinds on people for the long term. One. Two, HRs exist for the protection of the organization. That is a valid statement. Their job is to make sure that that organization stays churning. So they are not there to be your advocate. They are there to advocate for the organization.
Right.
So I agree with you. You go to HR when there is something that is big bad boy. Like if they just made you cry, that's not why you go to
No,
HR.
no, but to your point, and I think that people who are especially starting out or earlier on in their career
Yeah.
need to understand, as the receiver of this behavior, going to HR as an advocate of yours, maybe there have been other instances or circumstances where there's been toxic behavior
Yeah.
initiated by the person who did it to you to others, and it hasn't been documented. So maybe the HR as advocate needs documented cases for them to take recourse
Well,
from.
and that's a chance you have to take. So I would say when you go to HR, and the challenge is again, having so many people, so many friends of mine, lots of conversations over cocktails, no names. But what I do know is that from their perspective, there are oftentimes they know there are bad actors in the organization that
Hmm,
there's not much they can do about.
yeah.
And so just know that they're not there to because they hate you, or they're not doing something because they don't like you. Sometimes their hands are tied no differently than yours. So I like
Understood.
to, put some good out in the world, because I have I do believe they're good people trying to do good things. But just like any of us, sometimes we end up in situations where we have to make decisions that we may not love, but it's what we have to do because that's
Right.
part of the job. The other question you asked about how to find companies that have good cultures.
Right.
I would say that's I would say a lot of research.
Sure.
Like I like to follow companies on LinkedIn. So if I'm looking at a company and whatever industry you're in, like really pay attention to some of the surveys that are out there, I think definitely can be manipulated of best places to work and stuff. But what I would do is actually follow them, research them, like go and looked on what is it, Glassdoor. Go
Yeah.
read some of the stuff people put out there and understand. And also, like if you're thinking about joining a company, try to connect with people that actually work there. LinkedIn is a
Yeah.
professional networking group, and then have honest conversations about like, what do you like about working there? What are, would you, if you had a choice to do it over, would you still choose to work there? um it is leveraging the information that is available, because again, when you're in the interview phase, And the interview usually is pretty telling too. But usually when you're interviewing, they're putting their best face forward, just like you're putting your best face forward. So do your recon before you even send in an application. I think that's super
I
important.
love that. I love that suggestion about doing the research, going in eyes wide open, speaking to people who either do work there or did work there. What do they enjoy most or least? I would like to ask a question now because you framed it really interesting. You said we all in this space of toxic or not toxic workplace environments, we play one of three roles.
Yeah.
And we talked about the instigator, the toxic originator. We talked about the recipient of the toxicity, but you also talked about a third role.
Yes.
As the observer. And I would really love to know, because I didn't even think of that. I would love to know how you address the observer role. And when somebody is in that role, what are some steps they can take to maybe, with sensitivity and delicate nature, address the toxicity to the instigator and or receiver?
So I have to say this up front. This isn't even in the book. I started talking about this after the book was done. So I have a feeling
This is
I
like
probably
an
need to
added
write
bonus.
another thing.
This is an added plus of,
Yeah, it's not even in the book.
being on Chazin-the-Dream.
So the observer, I actually think, has more power than either of the two first roles that we talk about. So, and because it exists kind of on a spectrum. And so when you think about working in a corporate environment, there are certain people, and I'm going to talk about the two extremes. There is the person who's like, not my monkey, not my circus. This is not my problem. I am not engaging. Look at that crazy over there. I'm glad that crazy's over there. I'm not engaging. Right. So you got that person. And then all the way on the other end, it is like, this is why this person comes to work. They are eating that proverbial bucket of popcorn. This is their Desperate Housewives or trash TV, right? The drama is what they live for. Like, girl, did you hear about the meeting yesterday? Holy smokes. There was screaming. And it is, why they're showing up to work. And so immediately you can probably picture people that you have worked with that
for sure
do either one of these or somewhere in between. And I think these people have more determination of your culture than anything else. Because the people who pretend like it doesn't exist, if those are people in power, if they have power roles, and I'm not just saying leadership roles, but you know what I'm talking about. There's a difference between leadership and power. If they have power in the organization and they choose to turn a blind eye, then they are unequivocally saying that's okay.
I condone it. I approve it. It's not, for sure.
As long as it's not my problem, so it's okay. It's okay as long as it's over there.
Right. And I do want to jump in and say that 20 years in corporate America, 15 years working with over 500 organizations, absolutely. When I heard you say the observer role, it was my experience that on the spectrum, the people in positions of power tended to be on that side of the spectrum of, we don't see it, we're not going to address it, we can in effect exist without acknowledging it, as long as our people are performing and producing.
It especially is true if the person who is instigating it is someone who is a high performer. Like you think about sales, like I think about sales a great deal.
Yeah, the rainmakers.
Like, if they're the money makers, whatever, it is amazing how much people will just not see. Like they know, but they're not going to see and they're not going to do anything about it. So those people are incredibly powerful, just like the people on the opposite end of the spectrum, because what they are doing essentially is candidly not working. They are stirring the proverbial pot. They don't want the drama to stop. That is their entertainment. If you think about how much time they're spending just churning stories, because guess what? My guess is, and this has rarely not happened, those people usually are always trying to keep the attention somewhere else. Because if you're looking over there, you're surely not looking at what's happening over here. And usually what's happening over here is not a good story. Either they're not performing the way they need to, they're not, the productivity is down. Because again, you're so busy making sure the whole office knows the drama when are you actually sitting down and getting work done?
Well, then here's my question about the individual. Again, I love this so much, and especially it's not in the book. I'm wondering when you're coaching leaders
Yeah.
and this topic of observing toxic or destructive behavior in organizations, what's the coaching advice or the coaching strategy around you're observing this, you're in a position of power where you could positively influence it. How do you proactively engage as an observer and somebody who's well respected to solve this or reduce this?
So again, you have to come back to, like, I don't like to say that go solve it, because especially if it's not directly your problem, you're there. What you should be doing though is reinforcing through your words and your actions. Like, go talk to that other leader.
Mm.
Or make it clear when you're meeting with your team, reinforcing through your actions, your behaviors, what the culture should be. So screaming is not allowed. Like, screaming is not tolerated on my team. That is not respectful. I don't scream at you. You don't scream at me. Now, granted, that may happen over there, but what you're doing with your words and actions is reinforcing that is not okay. I don't agree with the way that's going. Because again, you may not be able to change that dynamic that's happening that everybody knows about, but you can continue to set the standard how you choose to behave and talk about it. Say, hey, like, I know, because again, we have the pot stirrer going on. I know that there's a lot of talk going around the office. I just want to make sure that we as a team are very clear on what's acceptable and what's not.
I hear two things with that I think it's really powerful what you said, and I want people to capture this. One is I heard a strong need you've identified for modeling effective behavior to basically, this is our code of conduct. These are our guiding principles. And I guess if your organization doesn't have them, maybe this is a good place to start, is to document your values and your behaviors. But the second thing I heard is you referring to this from the observer standpoint.
Yeah.
As a teachable moment.
It is. I mean, and so when you and I have had this conversation, is I believe culture is made in the little things we do every single day. It is not the words we slap on a wall. It is not the big team outings we have once or twice a year. I mean, those are nice and stuff, but what ultimately determines the success of your team, the success, your team's, your company's success, is the things you do every single day. It's and again, I am simply saying, I'm not saying you have to show up perfect every day. Lord knows I did not. I do not now. But it's in what you do when you don't. And it's the actions you take next. And that is the teachable moment. Going back to what we said before, if you showed up and didn't behave well, have I shown up and been a holy terror because I had pressure being rained down on me and my poor little team? I came out too hot on a day for them and then went home and was like, oh God, what did I do? And then what did I do? The next day I showed up, we had a team huddle and I flat out said, hey, I owe you all an apology. I know I was not a good leader to you guys yesterday. I know I didn't listen. I know I was too aggressive. I'm really sorry. If anybody wants to come talk to me in private, you're happy to, but I just want you to know how I behaved yesterday was not okay. And I'm really sorry I did that.
And I'm really glad you mentioned that. And I'm glad you did, because I didn't help us earlier in our conversation close the loop on what you just said. When that happens, you need the self-awareness and the emotional intelligence. And it's not rocket science to go home and think about it and come back in and to say that mea culpa. But we didn't close the loop with, therefore, when you've done this, what an amazing example, and create, I hope, create as a leader that trust and foster that I'm wrong and will be wrong in the future and I'll overreact in the future, but I promise you I'll always acknowledge it and come back and ask you how I can be better. Like, to me, that would be a great way for us to kind of wrap this up in a Tiffany bow. Is your thoughts, your final thoughts on doing that as a leader and what it means to the people who you lead, because you can't be a leader without people you lead.
Well, let me also take a step back. Not always was I the person who magically had the awareness that I was a holy terror. Sometimes it took someone who saw me, heard me,
The
and was
observer, the
an
observer.
observer who came to me and said, you all right today? Like, are you sure you're all right today? Because holy moly, like you don't sound all right today. And so it took someone who was a trusted peer. And because I had developed these relationships, I've had employees come to me and say, why are you so mad today? Like, did I do something wrong? And I was like, no. And it wasn't until those moments, and it was kind of like, oh. So it actually took a brave person to say something to me and not basically say, hey, Kim, you're wrong. Hey, Kim, you're being difficult, whatever. But it was more of like the check-in. Are you all right?
But
Because
they knew you well enough to
I had set the
identify it.
standard that you could.
And you also set the standard of you can approach me because I
Correct.
value our relationship
Yeah.
and yeah.
And
It's
again, going back to, but those when you talk about teachable moments.
right.
And did I do like, and again, did I get it right every time? No, but the idea behind it is it's the trend you create. So when you go back to the actions how you show up every day, you're creating trends and what people can expect of you, what you can expect of others. And so it's just trying to show up a little bit better tomorrow than you did today. And so that you have that dynamic of if you aren't the most self-aware, which let's be honest, even on our best days, we're going to have, to your point, blinders.
Yeah.
That someone that cares about you, respects you, cares about you, loves you, whatever, can come to you and say, hey, I don't know if you're all right today.
Yeah.
You good? You need to talk about something? Like just maybe you need to pump the brakes. Do you need to go take a walk outside for like 10 minutes? Because I feel like you're breathing fire and you're going to scorch the office. So that kind of stuff. It's like, those are the things I think that are the most important in helping people become aware of when they are showing up in a way that they wouldn't be proud of tomorrow.
I mean, so much of what we've talked about and so much of what you and I previously have discussed and the things that led you to write the book are about things that you said earlier in this conversation. They're not rocket science, but it's all about relationships and valuing others and bringing your full authentic self and being mature enough to observe when you are and are not a leader. I mean, we could talk about this for hours, but
Well, and I just want to say the one thing I wish I would tell people is you have to be kind to yourself.
you mean
Because
giving yourself grace?
because I say this I've said this to almost every coaching client I've had. If you cannot be kind to yourself and forgive yourself, you cannot be kind and forgive other people.
We all forget that, right? I mean,
Yeah.
it's the whole notion in psychology, head
Be
track.
compassionate. Like
And
be compassionate to you.
I love that. And then so to wrap it up,
Yeah.
if we spoke to other people the way we spoke to ourselves, we wouldn't have any friends. So
Exactly.
be kind and give yourself grace. So listen, Kimberly, I love this. If somebody heard anything that we talked about today and said, I really need to talk to her because I'm going through these challenges, I know somebody is, or my organization could benefit from her talking to our leadership team, how would they get in touch with you?
I would advocate two ways. One, if you're on LinkedIn, go find me. I love people linking with me and being able to see what's going on in the world. And then two, you can easily go to my website, KimberlyJBenoit.com. And there's access to me there where we can set up time to meet with each other. And like I said, I just have a passion. I just want people to understand, like, we are hard on ourselves, we're hard on each other. And especially in the last 5 years, everything feels much harder.
Yeah.
So how do we back up a bit, breathe a little bit, have some compassion and some kindness, maybe laugh at ourselves because we've done some dumb stuff, but then figure out how do we do it better tomorrow. And so thank you so much for having me on the show. I love what you are doing and I believe in the power of culture. And I just am grateful that you have created this space. So thank you.
Thank you, Kimberly. And you all heard it directly from Kimberly. There's enough toxicity in the world. We need to do everything that we can to remove it because why? More than likely, we've all done it. So go buy the book today. And thank you, Kimberly, for coming on the program. And just let everybody know, if you missed some of those details, in the description below will be all of Kimberly's contact information. Kimberly, thank you so much for everything.
Thank you, Ethan.
Coming on
Thank
the
you.
show.
Thank you.